I'd like to welcome Berton Moran to Bigfoot Crossroads. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here.
You are known for local legends.
Yes, that's my YouTube channel, Local Legends, Berton Moran. I just threw my name on the end of it.
And what kind of stuff do you do there?
Ghost hunting. I look into urban legends around the world, but mostly just the strange. Sometimes I'll look into missing people cases.
Mm-hmm. How'd you get interested in all that stuff?
You know, honestly, it started very young. I grew up in a very haunted house, very haunted area. Growing up on the reservation, always heard a lot of stories, a lot of lore, and different things like that. And that's just pretty much what I've been interested in. Is
it your wife that's partnered up with you?
Yes.
And she's into all that stuff too?
She is. I know she might kick my ass for this, but I know she doesn't really enjoy. She does like ghost hunting, but she doesn't like some of the things that we encounter.
Yeah.
I know sometimes she's a little hesitant to want to go out into these places that I am adamant about going to.
Yeah, my wife won't have anything to do with any of it. She's not. She finds, she likes scary movies, but that's about as far as she takes it. She doesn't want, to experience anything in real life. We actually live in the same house I grew up in, which growing up, it had activity. Even before I was born, there was activity happening at this house, according to family members and everything.
Wow.
And she's experienced a few things, but, it freaks her out pretty good. She doesn't like to be in certain rooms by herself at night and stuff. It just kind of has that whole vibe to it.
I do understand. I know that there's a few places that I've been wanting to go and investigate that I am not allowed to. Because if I go, I'm not allowed home. So.
Have you ever brought anything home with you?
Yes, actually. It's kind of my own damn fault. I don't know what I was thinking, but there was a investigation I did a couple years back at a site called Gitche Manitou, and in the 70s, I believe it's teenage boys were brutally murdered out there near this cabin. And I went out there, and the cabin and stuff was all decaying and falling apart. And I was like, you know what? That'd be a really cool piece to put on my shit. And I brought it home. I was editing some video, and something yanked my chair back on me.
Oh, wow.
And I assume whatever it was, it didn't happen until I brought that thing home with me. So that's a weird one.
Yeah, for sure. So you originally reached out to me because I had made a post on Facebook, I think, about Thunderbirds.
Yep.
And you had a really interesting story. If you don't mind retelling it.
Absolutely. I believe it was either 2012 or 2013. And me and Cassie had been together for a few years. And my aunt lived in Gregory, South Dakota, which was a couple hours from here. Or like an hour and a half, but my parents were visiting, and basically a little get together, asked if we would come and, hang out. And we decided, it'd be cool. I haven't seen my parents in a while. So we jump in the car, we take the back roads out of our town down to Gregory, South Dakota, and we meet up with my parents. We there, great time. And we decided, it's starting to get a little late. It wasn't too late. Still sun was out, but we had an hour and a half drive. So we leave Gregory, and I can't remember what sparked the conversation, but I told Cassie a story my parents told me whenever I was younger about basically this kid that was misbehaving, a reservation kid, Native American, mom was just would not behave. So she threatened him with this giant owl. And she said, if you don't behave, I'll put you outside for the giant owl to get you. So the little kid, calls her bluff, keeps being an asshole. And we're talking like a toddler, maybe 5 years old, something like that. And the kid won't behave. So she takes the kid outside thinking that it'd be a good idea. And supposedly she does just that, closes the door, opens the door, and the child is gone. Never to be seen again.
Just gone.
Just gone. Instantly. Just as soon as the door closed, as soon as the door opened, the kid was gone, as if something was to pick it up and fly away with the kid. The mom, obviously devastated, and that's basically how the story ends. But part of it was that it was the giant owl that took him in this story. And part of it was that if you never really heard of this giant owl before, it will show itself to you to prove to you that it is real. And, you know, my parents told me this when I was a teenager in high school. Just, you know, this story from back in the day, and they told us about it, or told me and my brothers about it. And I'm just like, okay, but, you know, a lot of people think, well, your parents told you that story so you'd behave as a child.
Right.
But I was already a teenager at that point, so what was the point of that? So I tell Cassie that story. And she does as she used to do for most of my stories. I told her about growing up in a haunted house. She'd roll her eyes and say, sure, that's like the dumbest thing I've ever heard. So I'm like, hey, you know, it's not my story. I'm just telling you the story. And we get up probably another couple miles down the road to this 4-way stop. It's a little crossroads, and if you look on the right side of the road, the same direction we had to turn was this freaking owl. And this owl was huge. Like, it was standing facing north, but its head was already turned towards us. We were coming from the south, so it was basically waiting for us. And we pull up, and it's already locked its eyes on us. And we're like, are you seeing this fucking owl? Sorry, my language.
You're good.
And, she's like, what the hell? And I'm like, oh my God. And I slowly start to turn the corner, and this owl is like right next to the road, off on the ditch, but, you know, not in the ditch, not on the concrete, just right off. We drive by real slow, and this thing just head on a swivel, body doesn't move, just watching us. And I will describe this thing at roughly 6 feet.
Wow.
Is what I'd imagine how tall this thing was. We were driving a 2001 Oldsmobile Alero at the time. I'm driving by extremely slow because I'm just fixated on this thing, and so is she. And she's like, you know, she's looking at it. I'm looking at it. It's looking at us. It's kind of a lighter color. It's almost gray. I wouldn't say white. I wouldn't say brown, but it did have aspects of brown in its, you know, I want to say coat, but it's feathers. So I'm like, I'm going to honk the horn just to see what happens, thinking this thing's going to fly off. And I honk the horn. And as soon as I honk the horn, the wingspan just, it takes its wings out, and almost like a whoosh sound, you know, that whoosh.
Yeah.
And it never takes off. It just looks at us, but it holds its hands out, looking at us as like, I'm here. You called me. And it just stared at us the entire time. And after, like, whenever its wings opened up, Cassie screamed. She just about jumped onto my lap. Because it was her window closest to it. And it was, I don't know, it never took off. But, like, I know we just kept on driving down the road. And I remember the conversation going something like, what the fuck? What was that? What was that? How was it that big? What was that? And I'm just sitting there like, I don't know. And then she comes in and she says, what are the odds of you telling me that story and then that damn thing just being there? And I'm like, I don't know. So at the time, I didn't know much about owls.
Yeah.
So we did some research. We got home, and owls don't get that big. For some reason, this owl was huge. And, you know, I thought, okay, that's just a giant owl. Owls must get that big because I just saw an owl that big. And no, they don't get that big.
I mean, how large was the wingspan, would you guess?
Honestly, what I describe it as is as long as an Oldsmobile Alero, which is roughly a little over 14 feet.
So this thing is like pretty much wings out the size of your car.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And Cassie, she remembers this, all of it the exact same way. We talk about it, and she's like, you know, if I didn't see it, I wouldn't believe it. because it doesn't make any sense. And we get that a lot where she'll tell the story to her friends and her friends kind of like, okay, sure. Anybody she meets, and we're like, start talking about strange stuff. And
right.
They're like, right, sure you saw a giant owl, whatever. So she doesn't really like to tell too many people about it, just because she and I also kind of get those looks of people telling us, you know, you didn't see that, you're full of crap.
Did you talk to your parents about it? Did you tell them?
I did, and they were extremely nonchalant. They were just like, oh, you saw it.
Wow.
I'm like, yeah. They're both not alive anymore. They both passed through. I lost my mom a couple years ago, but yeah, I don't know what else I could say about what they knew about this freaking owl, but
right.
They just were at the time not really impressed at all. They're like, yeah, we told you about this thing.
I mean, have you heard other giant owl stories from up there?
I've heard some people in my past talk about seeing giant birds and stuff like that, and nothing as detailed as what I remember.
Yeah.
But in general, just, you know, I've heard that story, not just from my parents, but I've heard it from other people about, you know, the giant owl or a giant bird of some sort, talk about thunderbirds and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you know what Devil's Tower is.
Yeah.
In Wyoming.
Yeah.
And one of the legends is that these Native Americans were out hunting, and from my understanding, a giant bear came and was attacking them, and they prayed to their gods for rescue, and the ground started to shake and grow beneath their feet high enough for this giant bear not to be able to ever get near them. And that's what Devil Tower is. But in the story, at the same time, they were rescued by a giant bird of some sort of thunderbird came and picked them up.
Really?
And took them to safety. That's one of the legends of Devil's Tower.
Huh.
And I remember growing up, you'd see like flyers for Devil Tower, and it had like this giant bear with a long tail, you know, scratching on the sides of it. And they say, oh, that's why they had scratch marks on the side of it. It's because this giant bear was trying to get at the Native Americans.
Yeah, I've seen some old illustrations like that showing, you know, the giant bear scratching and everything, but I had never heard the Thunderbird aspect of it.
Yeah, because, you know, it was later in life when I heard that part of it and looked it up, but yeah, they talked that a giant bird of some sort, didn't say owl or eagle or anything like that, just a giant bird, Thunderbird, come and rescued them, took them off because they couldn't climb down.
Whenever you were doing your owl research, did you run across any owls that looked like that one? The
closest thing that I ran across for the size of it, but not quite the same head of it, would be the harpy eagle. Now, the harpy eagle, they get pretty big.
Yeah.
And it's very similar looking, but the harpy eagle has these ears that kind of protrude out on the sides, and this owl did not have that. It's just regular owl head. But the harpy eagle does have different characteristics.
Yeah. And they're also terrifying looking, just for the record.
Yes, absolutely. If you have not seen one, look one up. I remember seeing one and I thought, holy crap, did I find something? And I'm looking for bigger ones. And I never did find one quite as big as what we saw. But as far as in my research, the only other bird that come close is the harpy eagle.
One of the reasons that I was so interested in your story is there is an incident that happened to me down in Texas. And we were actually out looking for Bigfoot at the time. But we had gone to an area and, you know, it was late at night. We're out in the middle of the woods. We're on this old country road that's cutting through the woods. And we're kind of spread out. There's quite a few of us out there. And there's some crazy stuff going on, you know, but when isn't there crazy stuff going on in the woods in the middle of the night out in the middle of nowhere?
Right.
And I was kind of just panning around. I had a spotlight and I'm just panning around the tree line. And there was one of the guys that I was with was kind of over in this one area by the woods. And so I was kind of panning around to cast light where he was at to see what he was doing. And as I'm panning, I caught eye shine in the beam of the spotlight. So I stopped and put it back, you know, looking for the eye shine. And I focused on this thing. It was this tree. It was a forked tree, but the fork was like pretty much 3 feet off the ground before it forked. So it was real close to the ground. It was almost like two trees growing together.
Yeah.
And this thing was in the fork of that tree, and it was probably about 4 feet tall. And for the life of me, I could not figure out what it was. I mean, I'm like staring at it, and like, honestly, to me at the time, and now keep in mind, I'm hitting it with a spotlight. So it's all, the color is all bleached out and everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm, I don't know how far, maybe 20 yards away from it.
Oh, man.
But it looked like it was, man, I hesitate to even say it. It looked like tree bark.
Oh, wow.
Like the pattern and color of tree bark. And the head was kind of blocky. And there wasn't like any visible neck or anything. And then I could see like kind of a barrel chest. I couldn't see any arms or shoulders or anything like that because of the tree, the fork of the tree.
Yeah.
But that's what I could see. And these bright glowing eyes in the spotlight.
Oh my God.
And I'm like looking at it and I'm like, what the hell is that? And I shined my spotlight back over to that guy to see where he was at in proximity to it. And by the time I did that and put the spotlight back on the fork of the tree, the thing was just gone completely.
Oh my God.
So
wow,
that freaked me out for a long time,
Yeah.
Because what has eyes and is made out of tree bark, and it was just nuts. So then years later, I'm talking to another Bigfooter from Texas, and I'm telling him about what I saw. And he's like, well, that might have been a giant owl.
Oh my God.
I was like, really? Well, I never even thought of that, with like the coloring and how it kind of looked like tree bark and everything from that distance in the spotlight. Like, I mean, maybe it was the right shape. And he told me that he had seen a giant owl down in Texas, kind of in the same general area, like we'll say northeastern Texas.
Okay.
And he said it was in the daytime, I think, and he just walked up on it in the woods. It was like on the ground, just standing there. And he said it was like 3 to 4 feet tall, and it was just massive and wasn't any like breed of owl that he could recognize or ever find or anything like that. I can't remember the exact story, if it flew off or what happened, but
right.
This guy had no reason to lie to me. And I just found that really interesting. So then whenever you said that you saw a giant owl, I was like, holy shit. Like,
right.
And you hear a few stories here and there. So I don't know what to make of it, man.
Yeah.
Like, what are your thoughts on it? Do you think these are Thunderbirds that people are talking about, or is it something completely different?
Well, that's the thing, Thunderbird sightings go back way back in history. Native Americans, lower people, basically all over the world have seen giant birds that are associated with Thunderbirds. And like you said, when you come across other stories that are very similar, it really piques your interest because, and I don't mean to say anything negative about anybody's experiences, but it makes you feel like, okay, I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
Because I've seen this thing and I get told enough that, no, that's not real. It makes you wonder, like, did I see what I saw? And, if Cassie wasn't with me that day, if we both hadn't seen it, at this point, I probably would have convinced myself maybe it wasn't real. But
right.
I remember recently in the last couple of months online, somebody had started talking about a giant owl that they had seen that landed on the roof or the hood of their vehicle, like a truck. And they said that the eyes of this thing just stared at them, and it felt like it was like digging into their soul almost. And it was there for a while, and they were terrified, and it eventually flew off. But they described it very similar to my experience, was that this owl was huge, and it just looked at them. And that's what the owl did, it just stared at me. Now, I will say a distinct difference between their owl and my owl story was he described the owl eyes as almost cat-like, like a slit.
Mm-hmm.
And I would not describe the owl's eyes that I saw that way, but I remember just mainly the size and the actions of the owl. I do believe that there are possibly giant birds out there that have not been categorized.
I mean, there's just so many stories about them.
Exactly.
You know, and like you were saying, the stories date back for as long as people have been talking to one another. Mm-hmm. And they still continue to this day. But, you know, you hear some of these stories. I mean, like take yours, for instance, you know, 6 feet tall with a 14-foot wingspan. Like,
yeah.
I mean, you would think like, okay, well, how do people not just see it flying around constantly?
Right. Every once in a while, I notice a shadow of a bird, you know, flies over and you see the shadow of it. And I'm like, well, how big was that bird to cast that shadow? But I could imagine that, you know, let's say that the bird's really high up in the air. You think it's closer than it is, but in reality, it's just a giant freaking bird.
Yeah.
I do know there are quite a few sightings out there. And every time I hear about one, I'm always interested. I always get my ears perked up, you know. I was just about to ask, like you said, it was northeast Texas is where that happened?
Yeah, it was somewhere outside of Paris, Texas.
Okay.
Around the Pat Mays Lake area.
Yeah.
Specifically. But I mean, I was there visiting other people. I was a guest and they were leading us around. And so I couldn't tell you what road it was or where we were at exactly.
No problem.
You know, I just know that. I mean, I don't know the name of the road. Like we were literally just in a caravan of cars, just following the lead vehicle. And, you know, this is one of the places we ended up. I was all kinds of turned around. I didn't have any idea where I was, but, yeah, I don't know. I'd be interested in hearing other people's stories from that. If somebody else has seen, you know, a giant owl or something from that area, I'd love to hear about it. But yeah,
there's another podcast called the Bigfoot Society. And I called in and I talked to, it was actually a guy I met in Van Meter, Iowa, Jeremiah Byron.
Yeah.
And he's a great guy.
Yeah.
But I told him the story and he had some people listening in. And this other listener, I can't remember his name at the time. Forgive me for that if he hears this. But he called in later on, like a week later. He said, you know, after I heard that owl story, something was in my backyard, something huge over by one of my sheds, and he's pretty sure that it was a giant owl is what he was seeing.
Huh.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the more interesting aspects of your story, though, is clearly we're not talking about just a giant owl.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about this thing presents itself whenever you talk about it. So that kind of digs into the paranormal side of things.
Yes. I don't know. For some reason, I feel like there is a supernatural aspect to it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, kind of like how some people believe that Bigfoot is a supernatural being.
Right.
I'm not sure on your take on that, but some people describe him as, you know, able to go through portals or things like that. But ever since, you know, the beginning of this story with the whole owl thing, that was one of the main things. Is like, if you talk about this owl, you know, it senses it. It knows when you're talking about it. Kind of like whenever that woman put her kid outside and the giant owl took it.
Yeah.
I know that a lot of people have said, you know, that this couldn't happen because an owl couldn't pick up a kid. And I'm like, that's total bullcrap. I have found videos of a lot smaller birds picking up toddlers, not quite carrying them, like get them a few feet off the ground and accidentally drop them because it's too heavy. But if we're talking about an owl the size I saw, it would have no problem picking up a kid.
Yeah, there was a time, there was basically a neighborhood message forum online. And there were some bald eagles being seen in the area, and people were talking about them being dangerous to their, you know, pets outside and everything.
Yeah.
And people started arguing, you know, about the capabilities of a bald eagle actually taking a pet. So I looked it up, and sure enough, a bald eagle can snatch a cat up or a small dog, no problem.
Oh, yeah.
So an owl, you know, 6 feet tall with a 14-foot wingspan could definitely snatch up a little kid and haul it off in the air, no problem, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah. Recently, I, for work, was in that same area, and I came up to the same crossroad area, and I snapped a few photos just so I could, you know, share it with people. And I'm like, this is where it happened.
So you've had some other experiences, though, with the paranormal. You've mentioned a few things to me, in messages.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear about some of that stuff. Would you mind telling me about your demonic encounter that you had?
Oh, wow. Yeah, no problem there. That one's burned into my memory. And it's a little bit of a backstory to it. Whenever I turned 18, I was still in high school, but me and my parents at the time were butting heads, and basically everything felt like I just was not wanted in my house. So as soon as I turned 18, I told them, I'm moving up to Rapid City. And my mom at the time was very upset about it, but they, I understand, and they couldn't stop me anyways. And before that, years before that, my parents used to foster children for the state. We had a group of kids stay with us. They were all brothers and sisters, and one kid in particular was my age. And we got to know each other really well. I looked at him like family. I believe he was with us for like 2 years. And one day came where, we're giving them back to their family. So time to pack your bags and leave. And it was just that quick, it's kind of no warning that I was losing a friend. So
man, that'd be rough.
It sucked. It really did. So, after that, we lost touch. At one point, I was dating a girl in high school, and she asked me to go to a friend's graduation. So I went with her to her friend's graduation, and sure enough, there he was. He was graduating. And I didn't get to say hi to him, but I looked at him. I was like so proud in that moment. I was like, oh my God, that's awesome. I haven't seen him in years, and he's made it here. He's graduating high school on the reservation, and a lot of kids don't do that. So I was very proud of him. But I moved up to Rapid City. I'm staying with a cousin, and we're actually going to a school that's outside of Rapid City, but we're living in Rapid City. And one night we're at his aunt's house, and she's no relation to me, but it's his aunt. So my cousin's aunt's house, and I'm in the basement. Got a load of laundry from the week of school I had. And my mom calls me. I answer the phone and say, hey, what's going on? And she informed me that that kid that we had fostered had committed suicide.
Oh, man.
And that hit really hard at the time. And I am still very upset about it. But
Sure.
Fresh news really sucks. So I'm upset. I'm thinking to myself, maybe if I had said something to him at graduation to let him know how proud I was, or how much I still think about, him as a person, as a friend. And I get upset at everything at the time. I get off the phone with my mom. I'm like, all right, love you. I'm sitting there, I'm loading laundry into the basket, and I get pissed. I'm just mad because the way he killed himself was he had hung himself in the closet with like a sheet, and he just let his knees drop, and he wanted to go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like he could have stopped at any point, and he just went. So I was mad at everything. And I grabbed this basket of laundry and I just throw it across the room, and I'm pissed off, and I go upstairs and I'm like, whatever. My cousin's there, and he's got his girlfriend, and a couple other friends are all there, and it's his aunt's house, and hey, how's it going? What's up? And I'm just in a bad mood. I'm like, not want to talk about it with them. So I'm just being in a bad mood. And my cousin and his girlfriend, I don't really want to be around Bert right now. He's kind of being a dick. So they all go to the back room, and I'm sitting out there with his aunt, and his aunt is, watching whatever she was watching at the time on the TV. And she's like, what's going on? You seem like you're really upset. And I'm like, all right. So I told her what's going on. And by the time, I get into everything, I'm very emotional. I start crying, and she's got her head down, and she's, is talking to me, and she's all, that really is terrible. And it sucks that life's like that sometimes. But at the same time, she's really being really nice. I feel a sensation like I'm being stared at. And I don't know if you've ever been in a fight where somebody's just looking at you like, I'm going to rip your head off.
Mm-hmm.
And it, that feeling of, oh man, I'm in trouble. or this is about to go down. But I have that feeling for no reason at all. I have that feeling. She's had her head down. She's listening to everything I say. And I said, I start to, stop crying. I'm like, do you ever get that feeling that you're being watched? And she immediately stopped, looked at me and said, where? And I pointed to her kitchen, and through her kitchen is the basement doors on the other side of her kitchen. And as soon as I point to the kitchen, she looks up at it, and all the doors of her cupboards open. All the dishes that she had drying on the counter get thrown. All the plates and all the food and everything in the cupboards are just getting thrown out. It was insane. And at the time, I'm just like, what in the hell is going on? I'm pale white, I'm sure, because I was terrified. I'd never seen quite that much activity at all. And she very calmly gets up, goes over to this like cigar box thing she has on a shelf. She pulls out some sage and a lighter that's in there. She starts burning it. She's walking into her kitchen, and whatever is going on, like I describe it as a faucet being turned off or water going down the drain, because eventually, it's all down. But as she's walking in that room, one cupboard stuff stops getting thrown out of that cupboard, and the next cupboard, as she continues, is all stopping. And whatever it is, she forces this thing with the smoke down into the basement. She forces whatever it is down to the basement. She closes the door. She comes, sits, puts her stuff away, sits down, and she's like, you got upset in the basement, right? And I was like, yeah, I'm just terrified. And she's like, whatever it was, it tried to attach itself to you. And at this point, none of this is making sense. My head's just a million miles a second. I say, what do you mean? What is it? What was that? And she says, I'm not sure. I think it's a demon. And she was extremely calm about it. And I'm terrified, And the kids from the other room heard all this shit, and they're thinking maybe Bert's having a freaking attack out there throwing crap around. They come out and they're like, what's going on? And these kids were actually, some of the kids that were there were her foster kids, because she fostered kids. And she tells them, oh, the thing from the basement. And every one of those kids was like, oh, okay. And they go back to the room. And I'm like, whoa, what the hell? What? Everybody just knows about this? Everybody's just cool with this, And she says, we've been dealing with it for a while, and it had actually taken over. And she just has the name of the kid that it took over at one point. And she was, and I'm not picking on her at any means. She was a great person, but she was a heavier woman. Mm-hmm. And she said, I had to perform an exorcism on him. And I was like, okay, what? And this kid weighed maybe 80 pounds. He was a very skinny kid. She says it took like 3 of us to help hold him down, because I tried to hold him down myself and he picked me up. And I'm like, this 80-pound kid picked you up? And I'm not being mean to her. She's a great person. She was a heavier woman. And she's like, yeah, he picked me up like it was nothing. It took 3 of us to hold him down for me to perform what I did. And the kid was there, and he's just like, I don't remember any of it. But his sister was like, it was terrifying. And I'm just like, what the hell? And at the time, we were going to spend the night there. My cousin was like, do you still okay to spend the night here? And I'm like, no, I'm not spending the night here.
Yeah, I'm going to sleep down in the basement, as a matter of fact.
Exactly. I was like, no way. And I've told this story to Cassie, and she knows it's real, because she can hear my voice. She sees me, and she knows that I remember it very well. And I even took her to that house. I didn't take her in the house. I went back to the house. We were in Rapid City on vacation one time, and I was like, you know what? I want to see if she still lives there. So I knock on the door, and the lady's there, his aunt, and she remembers me. She's like, oh, how are you, Bert? And I'm like, how's it going? And I talked to her for maybe 10 minutes, because I didn't want to keep Cassie out in the car for too long. And by the end of the conversation, she's like, yo, you want to hang out and go? Because her and some other people were there. We're going to go down to a bar and blah, blah. And I was like, no, that's okay. But I did want to ask you something. And she's like, what's up? And I was like, is it still in the basement? She's like, yeah, still there. Still there. And I was like, man, all right. It was good seeing you. And, we said our goodbyes. But that was the last time I'd been in that house. And in fact, I think that's the last time I ever talked to her. But yeah, she's moved since then. And I don't know if she's had any more trouble with anything like that.
Yeah. I wonder if it stayed at the house and is bothering somebody else now. That's scary.
Yeah. And yeah, it's honestly one of the most terrifying things I've ever experienced as far as paranormal goes.
Yeah. But from what my very limited understanding of demonic type encounters and just negative spiritual encounters in general, I mean,
yeah,
they seem to be attracted to that negative energy, you know, like the stuff you were going through at the time.
The vulnerability is what she said. You made yourself very vulnerable, and that's like a chink in the armor, a real weakness, is they can see their way in through that.
Yeah.
I'm guessing, from my understanding, that kid was upset whenever they moved in her house because he was no longer with his family and they were just fighting all the time. And then he ended up being very upset and got, you know, emotional. So he opened up himself vulnerable and whatever it was, you know, tried to take a shot, and it did with him for a while. But luckily for me, I felt that feeling of being looked at and I brought it up.
Tell me about this. Was it a haunted junkyard?
Oh, yes. Yep. Well, the house that my dad built out there was actually just a few, like, to start with, he took, I believe it's 3 trailer houses, put them together, and, you know, basically built them all together. And he dug out the spot for the pumps and everything underground. And he put all these trailers there, and that's his junkyard. And we brought cars in all the time, but earliest memories, like if you got scared, I went and slept on my mom and dad's floor. And there was this light that appeared one night that I noticed as a kid, and I'm sleeping on the floor and I see it. And I was like, okay, that's weird. And I'm not thinking it, because I'm like 5 at the time. And I just go back to bed because, you know, what do I care? I don't know what everything is. I don't know what anything is. And my older brother, he comes in one of those nights and he says, "Who's the old lady?" Mom and dad look confused and they're like, "Old lady? Who's the old lady that keeps coming in my room at night? She walk into my room, and then she go back to the bathroom, and then she's just gone." And that's how he described it. When she comes in my room, and then she's gone. So eventually, every one of us saw, almost like clockwork, it seemed like every night almost, this woman would appear in our bathroom, walk into my brother's room, back to the bathroom, and then she would just be gone. And she was like, had like this glow about her, and that was the light that I was seeing, was that glow. And we lived 5 miles out of town on the reservation side of the White River, South Dakota, and there was no way somebody was coming into our house that night. You know what I mean? It was same old lady. She did the exact same thing. It was what we just, you know, what I've researched is called a residual haunting, because it doesn't change at all. Mm-hmm. And it started to happen so often. It happened during the daytime. Sometimes my dad would have friends over, you know, somebody stop in to drink coffee with Roy Moran and Peggy, and my mom and dad always had this huge coffee pot for company, and they'd have that thing going. They'd probably refill it once a day because they were heavy coffee drinkers. But my dad, I remember one specific one that I remember I was there for, I go in the kitchen for something, and the guy's drinking coffee, and he looks at my dad and he's like, "Oh, I didn't realize you had company." And my dad's like, "What are you talking about?" "Well, isn't your mother-in-law in the back there?" And he's like, my dad's part Native American. My mom's a white woman. So this woman was glowing, almost kind of a white, bluish haze. But this guy thinks that what he sees is my grandma, which it's not. My dad says, "What?" He says, "Yeah, there's some lady I just saw walk into the other room back there." And my dad says, "Oh shit, no, that's the ghost. That's a ghost lady." And this guy's like, "Sure it is, go."
Yeah.
And my dad said, "I invite you to go back there and look. There's nobody back there. Go on ahead, go look." So the guy gets up and he goes back there and he looks around. He goes in the bathroom. He goes in the back room. He comes back out and he says, "Hey, I got to go." And he just left. He's like, "Nah, I'm not sticking around. This guy just showed me that I saw something. I saw a woman that's not in the house." He says, "And they're telling me it's a ghost, and now there's no woman there." So he just left.
What did she look like? Like, what kind of clothes was she wearing and stuff?
Almost like I want to say I want to say almost like a dress nightgown kind of thing.
Yeah.
Eventually, like being young, we asked my parents, what do we do for her? Basically, what my brother was saying to her, what do we do to help this woman? Because we feel bad that she's stuck here. And my mom and dad just said, pray. All you can do is just pray for her. And eventually we saw her less and less. And then eventually she was just gone. So I'd imagine by the time I was 8, she wasn't there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there was another instance years later. My father had added yet another trailer house to the mix of trailers. Our house set up kind of like a maze. And I'm in the newer trailer, really nice. And I'm doing my homework. I look down the hall, down into the laundry room area. And there's this kid poking his head out around the corner from the other hallway, which leads into the kitchen. And I'm thinking, okay, mom and dad got company. And me and this kid, we lock eyes for 30 seconds. I'm doing my homework. I look up, this kid looking at me. I'm looking at the kid. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, there's somebody here. My parents have guests over. And if, that happens, it's basically my responsibility as a child at the same, or a high school or a kid at the same time, still a kid in high school, to go get that kid, turn on cartoons so that the parents can talk and cuss and do all their...
Right. Occupy the children.
Yeah. Entertain so the other people can, have a good time without worrying about their kid. So I go out there and I'm expecting to find, my dad, my mom, and another man and woman and a kid sitting there. And it's just my mom. She's doing dishes. And I walk up to her and said, who's here? She said, oh, it's me and you. Your brother's down at the White Buffaloes and spending the night. Your dad's in town playing slot machines, gambling. And I'm like, who the hell's the kid? What kid? The kid I was just staring at in the hallway. And she looks at me and says, there's nobody here. It's just us. And like I said, we're 5 miles from town. And I'm thinking, what are you talking about? But there was no kid. I looked around the house. There was no kid. There was nobody there but me and mom that day.
Was that the only time you saw him?
That was the one and only time I ever saw that kid.
Huh.
Just once. And like I said, if we hadn't both looked at each other for a prolonged time, I watched him duck his head back into the other room. So I'm like, okay, there's just some kid here. And
it didn't look like a ghost, obviously. It looked like a fully materialized little kid. Wow.
Yeah. Yep. Now, one of the scariest stories that I could tell you was a guy, I won't say his name. He recently passed. He is an older gentleman, even back then, but he was a veteran of the Marine Corps. And he was one of the nicest people I've ever met. Just awesome guy. And he was staying late one night. My dad hired him and his crew every year to come crush a load of cars. My dad would save up cars for the year. We'd crush them. Dad would make a bundle. And, he hired those guys to come out and crush cars. So they brought out their crusher and the crew headed out for the night. Me and my brother actually were in town at the time. And I think we just went to like the drive-in to grab some food, something like that. And we're driving the 5 miles back into town down this long hill. And we see his vehicle. And it's a big van, one of the older vans, something you'd see on a junkyard kind of thing. And he's waving us down. He's a Native American guy. And he told me some stories about when he was in the Marines that honestly still, I'm just like, wow, that's terrifying that you saw that. But he's waving us down like, we're like, hey, what's going on, man? And he comes up to our window and he's pale white. And this dude was pretty dark skinned, but all the blood just rushed out of his face. And he was, I'm never fucking working there at night by myself again. I'm not working there at night anymore. I'm not doing it. And we're just like, what's going on? And he went on to tell us the story that just happened to him literally minutes before we saw him. And he was in the front end loader, picking up cars, stacking them next to the crusher. That way in the morning, whenever his crew shows up, they can start loading the cars into the crusher and there'd be, give him more time to start bringing more cars over. He said, I looked over at my van and my lights were on. I jump out of the front end loader. I go turn my lights off, get back to work. Like a few minutes later, I look over. the damn lights are on again. And he's like, I go and I turn my lights off again, and I close the door, I lock it. He goes back into the front end loader, moving cars. A few minutes later, his lights are on. And he said, at that point, I'm out. He goes over and it's on the other side of the gate or whatever. He walks through the gate. He unlocks his van. He goes to get in. He takes one step up on the rail, grabs the steering wheel to get in, and something grabs him by his collar of his shirt and slammed me to the ground. He said, whatever it was, he's yanking me out of that fucking van. And I look around. He said, expecting to see somebody. Nobody was there. Nobody was there. He said, it forcefully grabbed me, whatever it was. And then he crawled very hurriedly. He said, I jumped right in my fucking van. And he says, now I'm talking to you.
Wow. That would be terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah. This guy was a Marine, and some of the things that he had seen that he told me that he felt comfortable telling me about.
Yeah.
I hope I never have to see.
And this shook him up.
It shook him. It shook him hard. And he never did. He never did work there at night. Every time the sun got close to setting, he was gone. All right, bye. And he was a hard worker. He was willing to work late just to get the job done. But not there. Not anymore.
I wonder if it was just stuff attached to the cars and the trailers, or if it's the property itself, or what it was.
Or it could have been a combination of both. You know, we had so many vehicles come in that people had died in.
Yeah.
One I talked to people about that, and it's pretty grotesque that I even bring this up, but I remember whenever I was younger, if we got new cars in, Dad said we could search through them. We'd find like toys and stuff, you know, in the back seats of cars or in the trunks, or we'd find loose change or a couple bucks in the glove box. And as kids, you're like, hell, I'm going to save that money up. And this car comes in and Dad says, go for it, you know, go look through it, find what you can find. And as soon as I get up to the car, I notice that there's like blood on the dash and stuff. Not a ton of it, but what stuck out more than anything were the teeth that were embedded in the steering wheel.
Oh, man.
Yeah, it was violent. And you think, you know, I don't know why it is that for some reason a lot of paranormal stuff happens in places where violent death happens.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a violent death, is to be torn apart in a car like that. And I believe that cars can be haunted. I mean, if you can live in a RV, that's a domicile. You know, what's the difference between an RV or a car from a house? It's still a dwelling of sorts.
Well, I mean, you hear about, you know, people buying antiques or something, or buying something at, you know, a yard sale and bringing it home, and that item being haunted. You know, you were talking about that type of situation just earlier.
Exactly.
So, like, I think people could easily get attached to a car or be, you know, tied to a car somehow. If they can be tied to, you know, random objects, why not a car? I mean, people love their cars and they spend a lot of time in their cars, you know?
Yeah.
And if you die in a car wreck in your car, like, sure, I can see it. And, you know, boats are haunted. There's all kinds of famous boat haunting. So why not? Oh,
yeah, exactly. All kinds of famous. That's another type of vessel, you know, automobile, if you would say, I guess. But
yeah, I mean, it makes sense if the guy's there to, you know, crush these cars and everything, and there's a spirit that's tied to one of those cars, they're gonna.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember once we had an old Jeep come in, and I'm not saying this is paranormal, but it was just something kind of creepy. Me and my cousin were looking in the middle, like nighttime. We had flashlights out, and on the hood of this thing, somebody had scratched in the paint, "Help me, it's got my mom."
Jesus.
And we looked at each other and we're like, what the hell does that mean? Yeah, we're like, what the hell does that mean?
That's creepy.
We can come look at this car again tomorrow. I'm not doing this tonight.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was like the creepiest thing on the hood. Like, and it wasn't like a huge scratching. It was maybe the 6 by 6 inches. It's got my mom. And I'm like, what the hell does that mean?
Like something a little kid would do.
Exactly.
Man.
It was, I don't know. We were like, that's enough of that. No thanks.
Well, Bert, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for coming on and sharing all your stuff.
Yeah.
I'm sure you got more stories. I'll have to have you come back on sometime and tell some more ghost stories.
Absolutely.
And people can find you at youtube.com local legends.
Yep, Local Legends on YouTube. You can follow me on Twitter at Berton Moran. If you guys want to reach out to me, you can message me on Facebook at Berton Moran. And yeah, it's been awesome sitting here with you.
Yeah, for sure. And if you've had your own encounter with something you can't explain, Bigfoot, ghosts, UFOs, or otherwise, send me an email at bigfootcrossroads@gmail.com. Check out the website, bigfootcrossroads.com. You can find links to all the social media, past episodes, merchandise, and all the stuff all in one place. And until next time, remember, there's something in the woods.